Thank you. So my name is Jenny Bryan, and I am so grateful that you're here. As I said, we are just here to talk about a couple of different topics that are important to us, and we hope that it'll be a really interactive session. Please don't bother raising your hand for me anyway. Just jump right in there. I'm hoping that we can get some lively discussion. Free speech on college campuses is my topic. It's a robust topic, and so I hope that we can kind of dive into some stuff. I have a lot to cover, as you can see on my little points here, so I am going to move rather quickly through them just so that we don't get stalled out on any one thing. There is so much to this topic and to the First Amendment in general that we could, literally spend, there's entire, 14-week classes on the First Amendment. So I'm just going to kind of broach some brief topics that I think that are important for you to know about in terms of the state of free speech on college campuses. So again, I'm Jenny Bryan. I'm a doctoral student at East Tennessee State. I actually work here at MTSU. I'm the assistant director for student unions, and that's part of what led me to become interested in this topic. The Student Union Commons is a really popular area for people to exercise their rights to free speech, both student groups as well as externals that come and bring displays and things like that. So over the course of my 6-year career here, I've worked quite a bit with groups and their rights to free speech. So that's what initially got me interested in it. And I think I'm heading into my 2nd year of my doctoral work, and at this point, this is what I'm considering doing as my dissertation topic. So it's one that I've researched a lot. It's one that I still have a lot more research to go on. So I am in no way an expert on the First Amendment or on free speech. I'm literally a student of free speech. And so I hope that you might learn something from me, but I'm hoping that I'll learn from you as well. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is just kind of briefly review what the First Amendment is. And interestingly, there's been some studies done that 1/3 of Americans cannot name a single freedom of the First Amendment, not one. Does anybody know how many there are? No. Okay, so pull out your phones if you will, and we are going to do a little exercise. I'm going to endear myself to you guys and do a pop quiz right away, right off the bat. You're going to love me. There's no credit. We won't take your pizza away. So it's gonna be just fine. But if you will, I need to bring this over. I've got to toggle between 2 computer screens here, so just give me 1 second. Stand by. Okay. What I would like you to do is go to menti.com, 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 and I'm going to have you use the code when prompted 751721, and that will give you the opportunity to answer my little quiz. And what I'd like you to do is name the freedoms afforded by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So you can skip the freedom of part and just give me the other part. I'll let you guys log in. Is everybody getting in there? Menti.com. All right. Give me a thumbs up sign when you've gotten on there. Okay, cool. We'll give it 1 more minute. menti.com. All right, and go ahead and enter that code. And do you see my question there? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. If you'll go ahead and answer my question for me. Name the freedoms afforded by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And give me a thumbs up sign when you're done, when you've done all that you can do. You're thinking hard. I can see the wheels turning. I can see the gerbils in there. Should I give you a hint how many there are? There's five, which corresponds to the 5 slots I gave you. You might see how I did that. Very tricky like that. All right, thumbs up. Everybody done?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what you got here. I've got 12 respondents, all right. Someone's not in yet, but that's cool. Okay, so we got freedom of speech. We got freedom of religion, that's awesome. Freedom to protest, that's good, the freedom to petition. Freedom of assembly is one, freedom of press is one. I think we might have gotten them all. So you can see that just like any word cloud, the answers that are most frequent will be the brightest and the boldest. So speech you got. I did give you a little hint with my with my opening slide. I gave you a freebie there, but religion you're pretty confident on, and then assembly, press, and petition. So okay, let me switch back over to my presentation then. Just a second. All right, so the First Amendment of the Constitution says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay, so we've got religion there. We can practice any religion we'd like, anytime we'd like. Freedom of speech, we can say what we want, kind of when we want here. Freedom of the press, we can put our opinions and put it out there, whether it's negative to the government or not. We can assemble, show that in support of something or maybe in opposition to something. And we can petition, if that's the piece about going to the government for a redress of grievances. If we don't like the way that they're managing things, we can go to them and say that we don't like it and we want to change. So those are all the freedoms that the First Amendment of the Constitution affords us as U.S. citizens. Free speech is the one that is kind of the hot topic, as I said, on college campuses. It's the one that I'm most interested in, so that's what we're going to focus on today. I'm going to start off really briefly and talk about academic freedom. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because, again, we could do a whole class just on academic freedom. But it is faculty members and students can engage in intellectual debate without fear of censorship or retaliation. So there are some limits to that in the classroom context. If a professor is in some way addressing a topic that's related to the course, he can kind of take whatever position he wants. Outside of that classroom, things get a little bit different, and so there's, like I said, there's lots of nuances to that. But academic freedom is one of the main things that the professors really need in order to be able to pursue the research they want to do, and try to teach students topics that they may not have been aware of before. So that sort of protects them. Okay, public versus private. Again, I'm just going to hit this really fast, hit and run here. Public universities are different from private universities in regard to having to be accountable for upholding people's First Amendment rights. Okay, so public universities, because we are funded by the government, at least in part, are legally bound to protect their students' First Amendment rights. So we have to be very careful about the policies that we make. We have to be very careful about limiting. We'll get into this a little bit more down the road, but limiting their speech or where they can speak, because it would be in opposition then to the Constitution if we started sort of making up our own stuff. Private universities are a little bit different. They're not legally bound to the First Amendment, which regulates government entities, but they may have policies that are stating a commitment to free expression on campus, and that's often the case. Now, there are times when a private university may not feel the need to support freedom of religion to the same degree that a public university would, because there's some institutions that are created for the purpose of that, I guess, educating on that particular religion. But in general, you'll still find at a lot of private universities, many of them do get federal funding too, to some degree. So you'll still find that that they often will, still try to, in some way, at least in part, support free expression on campus. The one big difference, I used to work at Vanderbilt, a private institution. The one big difference is that external groups, how many of you have seen our preacher friends out on the Student Union Commons, up in arms, and really trying to be provocative and trying to engage students? They have a First Amendment right to be on this campus. They have the right to state their opinions. And on a private university, that's not the case. It's privately owned, and we never had to deal with that. So it kind of makes things a little bit easier in that sense to manage things. Any questions so far? Okay, like I said, I'm just kind of briefly touching on those pieces. Student activism, this is where I'd like to kind of get you guys involved in. Have you noticed that student activism is on the rise? Has anyone seen that in the last, how many years have you guys been on campus? 3 or 4? Okay. I would say in the last 5 to 7 years, there's been an incredible increase in the activism on campus. Why do you think that is? Give me some ideas. Anybody have any thoughts? What's been going on in the last 5 to 7 years that would cause our students to become more engaged in their First Amendment rights?
The outside world is.
Exactly. What about the outside world?
Just people wanting change.
Yes. There's a lot of polarization in terms of the political environment, right? And so our students are wanting to have their voices heard as well. Why else? What are some other reasons that students have become more engaged on this topic?
Human rights being violated.
Yes. There's a lot of social movements that have spurred students to stand up and organize, student organizations. There have been a number of new student organizations that have been formed around social movements like what? Who can give me an example? In the last 5 to 7 years, what'd you say?
Me Too.
Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, Not My President. What else?
A lot of police violence.
Yes. Yes. That's right, police brutality. And so in the last 5 to 7 years, we've had candlelight vigils, we've had, silent protests, and not just on our campus, but across the nation. Students are really feeling a responsibility to again, let it be known that this is not okay with them, or to let their voices be heard. So let's see if we hit them all. So polarizing politics in the nation, social movements in the nation. We talked about, this is one we didn't address. This generation, this new traditionally aged generation of students is called what? What's our newest generation? Well,
The Linksters or Generation Z.
yeah, or that generation Gen Z or iGen, sometimes people call them.
Linksters.
Yeah, and so one of the major characteristics of this group is they want to make a difference. They have this sort of driving need to put their thumb on something, I guess, and to let it be known. And so for that reason, again, lots of new student organizations being created, and they're getting out and about to have their voices heard more than they may have in the past prior to that window that we talked about. Campus is a relatively captive audience, right? You have to kind of go the same path on the way to classes. Many of you end up, in the student union for lunch, and so a great place to to capture people's attention, both for student orgs and for external groups, as I mentioned, is that commons, because there's lots of thoroughfare. Same thing on the Knoll in the KUC. Okay, and then this one is important, the belief in the marketplace of ideas, and we'll talk about this a little bit more too in the future. But one of the reasons we go to college is to begin to stretch, ourselves, challenge ourselves, and kind of get exposed to ideas that are different from our own. And so many of the students that come on campus were sort of ripe to have new experiences and again, want to get involved because they are outside the shelter of their parents' home for the first time sometimes. And so for that reason, it's just kind of a whole new world. I got Aladdin running through my head now. And then this is a big one we didn't hit. Why would social media have an impact on activism, student activism?
Well, social media is like the main thing in this type of social climate that we have. So it's like you'll find news quickly on social media. You'll find anything quicker than you would like on television or in a newspaper or on the radio. Social media, like we literally have all of our phones out right now. So if anything pops up on our phone, like an Amber Alert or anything like that, we'll be the first one to get it.
Right. There's just lots of information to be had, and very, very quickly. I've been reading a lot about the state of the conditions with the children that have just crossed the borders. I'm sure you guys have seen a ton of that, and there's lots of controversy on Facebook, and fake news, and no, it's not, and so that social media platform is really causing people to engage from the comfort of their own homes, where they don't have to think things all the way through too sometimes. So for that reason, it's just kind of, it's like, adding oxygen to fire. It's just kind of, pushed everything up a notch. Okay, so political correctness. Now, know that, come on in, Jeremiah, have a seat, and you guys grab some pizza. So know that I'm fairly apolitical myself. I consider free speech a nonpartisan topic. I really do. I just think it's important for us to be educated about our civil liberties and to I guess protect them for ourselves and for others. So I'm going to talk about this political correctness. There's going to be some different opinions in here. I'm just going to kind of try to present to you both sides. And that with hate speech as well when we get to that point. So anyway, my little disclaimer that so there's many people right now, as I'm researching the topic of free speech and free expression, believe that there is an extreme level of political correctness, much more so than was the case in the 80s or the early 90s, much more so than in the 60s, where there was another sort of activism movement, and that they're labeling political correctness as avoidance, sometimes to this extreme degree, of forms of expression that are perceived to marginalize groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. So tell me why you think there's been this heightening of the political correct syndrome. Anybody have any ideas on that?
Well, usually people try to. So, are you saying like who is politically correct, or why is it important to be politically correct?
Why do you think that now in this 2019 and in the last, like I said, 5 to 7 year window, why do you think there's been a steep incline in terms of political correctness in general and on a college campus in particular?
Well, usually it's kind of hard to, especially like you said in 2019, you made that very clear. People take your words out of context, and it's like you have to be sure and be very, I don't know, you just have to watch what you say sometimes to people. You have to literally be politically correct, because anything can hurt anyone's feelings, especially nowadays, because there's so much tension in the world. You just don't want to step on the wrong toes. And now we live in this type of day and age that people cancel each other out, or they'll try to run them off or something like that just because of the things that they say, instead of trying to get to the deeper meaning of what they said and just run with whatever they said out of context. And it's sometimes not even what was meant to be said.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good. You kind of hit both sides of the coin for us too. That people are trying to tiptoe around, and others are not. Others are kind of like bull in a china shop, right?
I
And
think there's also like more of a awareness going on in the different time that we're in right now. Because back then a certain word was okay to say, and
Right.
this and that, but now we're aware like, wow, that's actually negative. So I think I also agree with like we're in this era of like we need to cancel, but we're also in a place of you actually do need to cancel because all of this time you've been saying this negative word, and now we are aware of our worth and what we feel like today in society, and we feel like you shouldn't say that anymore.
right, exactly. The voices that have never been heard before are being heard in an entirely different way, and the campuses in general are much more diverse than they ever were before, due to this expectation now that you get a college education, due to financial aid becoming more available, due to online programs making education accessible to some that would never have been able to step foot on a college campus prior to that. So the diversification of campus, the social movements, just in general, our awareness of diversity have all contributed to this. Another couple of points are an increase in mental health issues have made people super aware of the impact of traumatizing words and things like that. And then I had another point and it flitted through my brain and back out. I'll come back to it in a second, I bet. But so there's been just sort of a shift in terms of the people that are involved in these conversations. Okay. So I'm going to tell you about a few of the things that people will argue are overly politically correct. So trigger warnings, a statement at the start of a lecture, video, display, alerting the reader or viewer to the fact that it contains potentially distressing material. Again, we've become more aware of the impact of sexual assault and all those sorts of things, and so how we're on a campus that's vet friendly, and so some of those people are facing PTSD, and that's again true for many campuses across the nation. And so this is one example, just to give you guys a concrete example of a trigger warning that we use here at MTSU. Again, I do a lot of reservations on the Student Union Commons. This notice is: you are approaching an area where individuals or groups are exercising their constitutional First Amendment rights. You may encounter words and/or images that you find to be disturbing or offensive. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or positions of MTSU. So we're letting people know that we put these out when we have those preachers we talked about that are highly contentious. We put it out when there are displays for anti-abortion groups with graphic imagery, and we'll put them on the perimeter as you approach that area so that maybe you see it and kind of get a heads up that that's what you're about to walk into. The opposite point of view on this is that, again, we've come to expect trigger warnings to the point where we're actually injuring our students. We're not preparing them for the real world because they're not going to go around, just on the street and turn a corner and necessarily have a trigger warning to give them a heads up that they're going to walk into a display like the one we just talked about. And so some people believe that we're actually stunting students' emotional growth by protecting them too much. And so this little cartoon says, trigger warning: we were unable to find a speaker we could trust not to say something you might find offensive. Just cover your ears, it'll be over soon. And then he says, life is tough, and this lady's like, ah! So that there's a lot of research again about coddling of the American mind, as they're calling it, how we're just overprotecting our students. I just remembered the point that I forgot. This is this traditional group of traditional age college students are very much from the anti-bullying era, right? They've been taught to take care of themselves and to take care of their friends. Whereas, we were mean when I was in school. There was lots of slurs, and that was just part of the lingo back in the 90s in high school. That's so gay was, that was just a popular phrase that was uttered all the time, and you didn't even really think about what it meant. And so our students are much more aware, of LGBT issues. They're much more aware of diversity issues, and they have been taught from the very beginning that you don't bully. Bullying is not okay. Go ahead.
Well, this is a question. I'm not sure if you probably know the answer to it or not, but if that was, okay, so you did say that our generation is from the anti-bullying world or whatnot. So what's the reason for like suicide rate for like people of young adults to go up? But I
Well-
don't know the stats of suicide rates that was during, before my time or whatnot, but
Yeah.
it seems like sometimes the anti-bullying or something like that that can be a trigger warning too. Like, what is that?
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I'd have to do research on whether the suicide rates are up or whether we're just more aware of suicide attempts. Because I would argue, and I don't have the information to back this up. I'd have to go back and look. But I would argue again, we're much more aware of mental health issues. We're much more aware of the resources that we can offer to students with those issues, and there's not as much of a stigma as there used to be when I was, in high school or whatever, to talk about these concerns. And so I think it might be an awareness thing. But anyway, okay, let me move on because we're gonna run out of time. Okay, so safe space, an environment in which a person or category of people can feel confident that they will not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any other emotional or physical harm. Sounds pretty good, right? Just wrap people up in a bubble and we'll take care of them. And that's what many of our campuses have been trying to do, and many of our students are demanding that we do, is that they must feel safe on campus. It's not enough just to educate them, we have to make them safe as well. And so this is hard to read, I know, but this basically is a flyer. This particular university has a safe space policy, and it basically says anyone who utters any thing against LGBT people, against anyone's culture, ideology, their age, maternity or paternity status, trans students, disability, race, religious beliefs. It covers everything. Don't say anything against anybody else, basically is what it is. And again, that sounds great on the one hand, but here's Real World Incorporated again. And the human resources officer says, I'm sorry, we don't have any safe spaces. So again, there's this big sort of debate in higher education about where does that line fall? How do we provide a campus where students are safe enough to get themselves back and forth to class and to know that they're supported in their learning efforts and all of that, but also be challenged. Where is that line? So that's, like I said, that's a big discussion point right now in higher ed. Microaggressions. A statement, action, or an incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. Again, that sounds bad. We shouldn't do that, right? We condemn freedom of speech that hurts other people's feelings is what the one side would say about these microaggressions. We have to be very, very careful, as Cabarrus was saying earlier. You don't know, somebody's background, and you don't know how you might injure them. So you have to be very, very careful. And then there's others that would say we've gone too far with this. I read an article recently where somebody was claiming a microaggression against a vegetarian because an offhanded comment had been made, and someone got in arms about how that offends the vegetarian community. A lot of what do you call them, comedians will no longer come to university campuses because of this extreme political correct era that we're in, because comedians, they're all about pointing out, sticking their finger in the sticky parts to make you laugh. And so a lot of them won't even do that anymore because it could be career ending for them to do that. Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk to you about, is the Chicago statement. This came out 2016. The Dean of Students at the University of Chicago wrote a letter to the incoming freshman class and basically told him what to expect to be challenged. He said, once here you'll discover that University of Chicago's defining characteristic is our commitment to freedom of inquiry and expression. This is captured in the university's faculty report on freedom of expression. Members of our community are encouraged to speak, write, listen, challenge, and learn without fear of censorship. Civility and mutual respect are vital to all of us, and freedom of expression does not mean that freedom to harass or threaten others, but you will find that we expect members of our community to be engaged in rigorous debate, discussion, and even disagreement. At times, this may challenge you and even cause discomfort. So he sends this out to the freshman incoming class, and what do you think happened?
Parents did not like it.
Some parents didn't like it, some students didn't like it, some faculty didn't like it. We are here to challenge our students. We are here to make them grow, to make them uncomfortable. If we don't do that now, they will not be prepared. They will not have the resilience that they will need when they go out into the real world to try to tackle some of these issues on their own, right? So anyway, like I said, it was a big. He goes on to say, we do not support so-called trigger warnings. We do not cancel invited speakers because their topics might prove controversial. We do not condone the creation of intellectual safe spaces where individuals can retreat from ideas and perspectives at odds with their own. So these are some pretty strong statements that this Dean of Students made, and like I said, the line started being drawn. And so there's.
Still there?
What'd you say?
Are they still there?
He's still there. He's still there. And this has become a huge movement now. Guess who signed on? So let me finish the thought. So like I said, the dividing line started being drawn, and faculty started coming out and being like, hold on, that's not what we do. We do support our students through trigger warnings, and it's unnecessary and unkind to draw them into a classroom without giving them an expectation of what they might hear. And others are like, they're going to have to learn to suck it up. They're going to have to learn how to raise their voices and speak out when they hear something that they don't appreciate or something that's hurtful. They need to be able to be equipped with the stamina to come back at someone and say, that's wrong. That's not okay that you said that. So anyway, lots of universities around the country started to sign on to the University of Chicago's statement, and that's what it's still called that today. A whole 3 years later, I make that sound like it was a long time ago. But the Chicago Statement is a huge movement. Guess who signed on to the Chicago Statement? Who? MTSU. We signed on to this. Now, we all kind of ride the line a little bit. We still have trigger warnings. I showed you an example of what we do. And again, I don't want you to think that there's anything wrong necessarily with putting some statements like that out there. But the opposite point of view is that when it gets to the point that students demand it and are claiming that they're injured without those things, that's when there's the other sect that's like, we need to prepare our students to be healthy and stronger minded when it comes to addressing these things. Okay, questions or comments on that? Okay, so suppression and censorship. So this is the tactic that some universities and students take to eliminate controversy on campus, again, with that desire to create a safe environment and one that people are comfortable in. But that kind of goes against what the founding fathers would say. Old Ben here says, freedom of speech is a principal pillar of free government. But when this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved and tyranny is erected on its ruins. So he's basically saying, and I guess the point too is that it's not that anybody's advocating to go out and be unkind and hurt people intentionally, but at the point when government starts to try to manage what is said and not said, or when the college institutions start to do that, then we're actually going against what people's First Amendment rights protect for them. So these are some examples. Speech codes. This was a really popular movement, and now people are dropping their speech codes super fast because they're continuing to be challenged at the Supreme Court level and continuing to be batted down. So an example of a speech code, it would be in like the student handbook. So this one says, the use of derogatory names, inconsiderate jokes, inappropriately directed laughter could all, in 2006 at Drexel University, could have run you afoul with the student conduct policy. And again, on the base level, it sounds good, but then you start to be like, inconsiderate jokes. what's inconsiderate to me might not be to someone else. That's a very subjective line to make these decisions. And so students are being held accountable for things that they're like, dude, like, it wasn't meant to be anything. It was just a joke. And so this FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, was, they founded and started just going after these higher ed institutions hardcore. They literally comb through every university's conduct policies and facility use policies and all of those things to call out this kind of language and to let them know you're violating someone's constitutional right by saying those kinds of things. Okay. Free speech zones was another popular phase that we're falling out of because again, it's not being supported at the Supreme Court level. That was when there was a designated area for the expression of the First Amendment on campus, and people could not be outside of that. Whether students or external groups, they had to stand in some cases in like a 6 foot by 6 foot box on one corner, the far corner of campus. So as to sort of chill their speech, but still give them their right. So that free speech zones really have been attacked by FIRE and other organizations trying to uphold the First Amendment rights. Disinviting speakers. How many of you guys have heard about speakers that universities have come back and said, we can't have you, you're too much of a security risk? The students have said that they don't want to hear you. And so again, the Chicago statement out and out, said we are not doing that. We're not canceling speakers because it might be offensive to someone. Because we want our students to have that exchange of ideas and to be able to buck up and say, no, I disagree with you and here is why. Heckler's veto is very similar. So, sorry, Ann Coulter up here is one that's been disinvited from several campuses. You might have heard of, I can never say his name, Milo Yiannopoulos. Huge provocateur, and so it actually helps him when someone disinvites him from campus, because then he can go on a program and say my First Amendment rights were violated, and then this Heckler's veto is up in the corner. This guy wrote a book on eugenics, and the students turned their backs to him and they were chanting over him so as not to be heard. This particular episode actually got kind of violent, and one of the faculty members who was actually there to debate with him got injured. So in some cases it's getting really out of hand. Thought I saw a hand back there. Do you have a question? No? Okay. Just a stretch, sorry. So I'm going to talk about hate speech now. This is what I actually think I'm going to do my dissertation on. And what I'd like you to do, again, real quick, is pull out that menti.com, and we're going to do another quick quiz. Okay, menti.com, and the code this time is 712029. 712029. Do you think hate speech is a form of expression that should or should not be protected by the First Amendment? And your choices are yes, hate speech should be protected, and the other option is no, hate speech should not be protected. So go ahead and log your answers in there. You guys are cheating off each other's papers, aren't you? All right, I got a couple holdouts. Did everybody log your answers? All right, got it in there. And then there's the next question. Where's my next question? Well, you're changing your answers as I sit here. I don't know where my thing went. To do it from this angle. Well, I can't get it. Okay. So one was should hate speech be protected, and the other was a general question about whether people feel that that they should support someone's feelings over someone else's right to speak. Okay, and so it's interesting, the results of this study that were done by the Freedom Forum Institute. They interviewed a ton of college students and high school students across the country, and basically on the front end, students are like, yeah, I support free speech, absolutely. But when it comes down to hate speech, they're out. They're like, nope, that's where I draw the line. And to be honest, that's kind of where I was too. And I'm going to present a different opinion just so that you can kind of understand the full debate on this. So here's our two differing views. Protect free speech, even hate speech. And notice that hate speech is in parentheses. Why might it be in parentheses? Go ahead.
There's no definition of hate speech.
That's right. That's right. Very good. It's a subjective term, and it's based on, the government or the institution or an individual deciding that that is offensive to them. Therefore, it must be hate speech. Who can think of a leader in history that now is revered, but at that time he was considered to be engaging in hate speech? Anybody? Pick any of the civil rights movement leaders, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Edgar. What did you say? Probably so. Yeah, I mean, some of these people were arrested over and over again for engaging in hate speech, but it was hateful to whose ears? Okay, so that's the point that I want you to keep in mind when we talk about hate speech, is that you can't assume that what your version of hate speech is another's. The opposing view is it's not about free speech, it's about bigots trying to normalize hate. And so again, as you said, the Supreme Court does not identify a category of speech as hate speech, nor does it deem disfavored or offensive speech unworthy of protection by the First Amendment. It is constitutionally protected. And I would argue that we want it that way. There are some European nations, like Germany, for example, that do censor free speech, and they have a much more violent history, particularly as it relates to Jewish people. They have people jailed for their differing opinions, and so it's actually it seems to be hurting their tolerance rather than helping it. Okay, so this movement kind of says that bad ideas thrive in the dark, shine a light, and oppose censorship. So that's kind of saying, if we just try to shush it or chill it or keep people from saying what they feel, then they just kind of lurk around behind closed doors and we don't really know what's going on. Therefore, we can't educate ourselves and we can't stand up against it, right? So these are some ideas for hate speech that are non-censorial responses. So counter speech, what do I mean by counter speech?
Having an argument to go back or rebuttal.
Right, exactly. Debate, a lot of people say debate equals de-hate. If we can go back and forth and talk things through, sometimes there's an awakening, sometimes there's a revelation of some kind that causes you to completely turn 180 degrees around. But that can't happen if we don't let voices be heard. Alternative programming. This is an example that we did at MTSU. Who knows what this is? Hands Across MTSU. And who sponsored it for bonus points? Center for Student Involvement and Leadership and SGA. that was yeah. So who can tell me, who was on campus then and can tell me why we had Hands Across MTSU? What was the impetus for that?
Mental health?
Yeah, it was the farm.
There was supposed to be like something.
The Forest Hall
around
movement.
Capitol,
Oh yes, the Forest Hall.
It was the Forest Hall movement, and also around that time there was that group of neo-Nazis that were going to be coming to Murfreesboro, remember? And then there was that Murfreesboro Loves campaign, and this fell right on the heels of that. It was all happened in a very short amount of time. Why do we think that this is helpful? Alternative programming. How might that address some of the concerns that we just talked about? How did that address the...
In a way, I guess. it acknowledged what was going on in our community at the time.
And there was, right, and there were some pretty strong statements that went along with it. I should have pulled an excerpt of President McPhee's letter that he wrote and sent out to the campus. But again, you know, he was very much like, we don't stand for this. That's not what we're about. That's not who we are. And you know, we're going to come show who we are by spanning the whole campus. And we did. Do you remember what the count was? I mean, it was a huge turnout. It was a huge turnout, and it was very telling. Meanwhile, the neo-Nazi group had a very small turnout in the Murfreesboro Square and was squashed within, you know, minutes of arrival. They were so outnumbered. And so that, again, if we had tried to pull their permit and not allow them to come and protest or come and be on the Murfreesboro Square, or, you know, if we didn't allow these debates on the Forest Hall renaming to happen, then students wouldn't have been able to show, you know, what their real feelings were too, right? Okay, silence can sometimes be a non-censorial response. You know, sometimes silence is very powerful. Allowing someone to speak, but showing your silent opposition for it. Now you got to be careful with silence. Can you think of an example in history when a group was silent and the outcomes were devastating? Me Too. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's sometimes when silence is absolutely not the appropriate tact. So you have to sort of judge on an individual basis. I'm thinking Nazi Germany. There was a whole lot of people that were intimidated and were silent as these atrocities, you know, happened against mankind. So that's an important distinction to make, is you've got to think about, you know, what the best way is to combat that particular issue at that time. Human connection. This is one of my favorite, y'all. Do y'all know Daryl Davis? Have you ever heard of this name? This African-American man lives in the South, and he has made it his mission to go and meet with these KKK leaders, because they're still in existence, to meet with them and say to them, how can you hate me? You don't even know me. And he sits down and engages in conversations with them to the point where they hand over their robes to him. He has like 45 robes in his garage from KKK leaders. Like, these are, I'm assuming these colors mean something, you know, like big dogs, I don't really know. But what I know is that he is making it his mission to make these human connections, to make people understand that we're all human, you know? So this human connection piece is incredibly effective when it comes to non-censorial responses. Okay, any questions about free speech and all that? How am I doing on time? 47, okay.
I have one question.
Yeah.
When you say hate speech, like, to what point, like, what happened in North Carolina, like, it was free speech, yes, but it came to a point where it became so violent it wasn't a peaceful assembly anymore.
Right.
Like, it's like when you have those sorts of assemblies, they can get violent very easily, and I think that is the fear that people have.
They can, yes, that's the fear that the universities have as well. That's true for controversial speakers too. One of the ways that universities are trying to respond to those are, well, those of you that were on campus around the time of the neo-Nazis, they were expected to be in downtown Murfreesboro, but we weren't really sure where they might show up. And Charlottesville had just happened, and so we had on campus that weekend. It was I'll never forget it. It was Halloween weekend. We had an event, and there was a big debate about whether we go forward with the event or not. Is it safe to have students out if these people show up or not? And so there were more officers than I've ever seen in my life on this campus. We had MTSU officers, Murfreesboro Police, Rutherford County, TSU, Austin P, Tennessee Tech. They pulled officers from everywhere to make sure that our campus was safe. Okay, so do you think that was an easy bill to swallow? All these municipalities had to be paid, right? And that's true for controversial speakers too. Safety is of utmost importance, but who pays? So many of our universities, ours included, is changing our facility use policy to begin to collect security funds along the way, so that we have pots of money to address these larger issues, so that no one organization, if a student group brings a controversial speaker, they can't pay a $30,000 security bill. And actually, again, they have successfully sued universities because they've charged them that bill. And so, anyway, it's a really really difficult thing to figure out. So, okay, I think I'm nearly at the end of my time, but we had a brief discussion about the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment at the beginning, so I wanted to quick test your memory here. So Jamie does not say the Pledge of Allegiance with her class because her faith does not approve of the line, "One nation under God." That's freedom of religion. Good. Kelly is an animal lover who does not believe in the sale of fur coats. She stands outside a department store with a sign that says, "Love rabbits, don't wear them." Freedom of speech. That's right, speech. And assembly. She grew up with a group of her friends. It could be assembly too. Tim, Dave, and Liz decide to meet at a local restaurant to talk about the recent presidential election. Freedom of assembly. Good. Frank is an advocate for peace. He organizes a letter writing campaign to urge the president to end the war. What is it? Petition. Very good. Wendy writes an editorial in her family's community newspaper about government corruption in her town. Press. Freedom of press. You can state those difficult opinions and put them in writing as long as they're not slander or libel, which we're not going to get into. Anne does not like one of the political candidates running for mayor. She decides to print and distribute a pamphlet describing his voting record. Press and speech. Both things, yes. Rachel wears a hijab to school as part of her faith. Easy, yeah. Religion. Amber, Adam, and Angie use a room in the public library for a meeting of their Support Our Troops Club. Assembly, yes. Candace burns an American flag during a protest.
Crazy.
Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, yeah. So with that, I would just like to say, again, it's really important to me that you educate yourselves about your civil liberties, that you engage in them frequently and vigorously, and that you support those that can't defend their own rights to those things. I appreciate